everyone to the August Lunch with NEMA. This is Heather in the NEMA office welcoming you to our lunch. I hope you guys are in a cool spot on this hot August day. I just want to get us started by saying hi in the chat feature. If you want to type in where you're dialing in from, that would be awesome so we can see who's on the call today. I know there's a bunch of you guys today. You guys love educators and education, which is awesome. Wow, Philadelphia, that's awesome, because I knew there were some new people signed up today, so that's awesome. So this is the one way that you guys are going to actually interact with Elisabeth during today's presentation. So if you guys have any questions at all during the presentation and stuff like that, just go ahead and type them in the chat feature. We'll actually be using them, this feature quite a bit today, so get used to that. Okay, you guys are definitely winning the Out of the Region award today. That's awesome. So we're going to get going. So if you're new to NEMA and Lunch with NEMA, this session is being recorded and will be available on the NEMA website this afternoon. And so I want to get going with small goals are better than no goals with Elisabeth Nevins from Seed Education Consulting. She's also one of our Education PAG chairs. So Elisabeth, I'm just going to start you off if you want to introduce yourself and get the lunch started.
All right. Sounds good. Hi, everyone. I see definitely some familiar names and not faces, and that, again, is my struggle working in this platform, and I know talking to a group of educators that you feel for me because I like interacting with my audiences. I like seeing faces and judging reactions, so this is definitely a new format for me. As Heather mentioned, I'm Elisabeth Nevins. I am one of your NEMA EdPAG co-chairs. I also do education, evaluation, and interpretation consulting throughout New England and the wider region. And back a few months ago, when I should have known better, Meg asked if I would be interested in doing a lunch with NEMA, and August was open, and I know that this is the time of the year when everyone's getting ready for the onslaught of kids, usually later in September and October. And, you know, once that ball gets rolling, it's very difficult to stop it. And sometimes we have the best intentions in terms of thinking about doing evaluation, and it falls to the wayside. So I really wanted to use today to give you all a set amount of time where you can actually do some planning and goal setting. So this is going to be a little different than your standard webinar presentation, I hope. Before we get started, I wanted to get a better sense. I do know, actually looking here, many of you, but I wanted to do a quick couple of surveys to get a better sense of who you are. So let's see. I'm not sure, Heather, if that worked, if the survey is up, but
it's working.
Good. Okay,
and then, I also forgot to mention, I did email everybody a PDF today. So if you haven't downloaded that, please download that and print it out because you will be using it.
You're going to be using that.
Yep.
You're going to have to write in between putting sandwich or whatever you're eating in your mouth. So how long have you been working in the field? I opted for this choice because you know, there's such a variety of ways in which we apply titles in the field. And so you could be a director of education in a very small location with, you know, one other person. So I'm trying to get a sense of, you know, how long you've been doing this. And you could be, you know, 3 years into your career with that title because you are at a small institution. So I thought we would look more at years in the field. That is more helpful to me. And I'm not sure how I can look at survey. I'm learning this interface.
So most of the people, we have the majority of the people that have answered it so far. So 1 to 3 years, we have about 26%, 4 to 10, 28%, and 10 plus 28%. So
we're pretty evenly split. Yeah.
Yep. All right, so we will end the voting on that one then.
All right, now real quick, how large is the full-time education staff at your institution to get a sense of kind of who you're working with, what your team is when we're thinking about implementing evaluation? and I know that there's many people out there who wear many hats, so that's the half of me one. So I do education and 6 other things as well. Not uncommon.
It's pretty interesting whenever we do surveys of like trying to figure out how many people are going to wear this hat versus that hat, and it's always a little confusing.
Yeah. It's not a clear-cut field, in terms of, we all wish we had the resources to have many bodies in all the different departments, but it doesn't work that way.
No. Okay, so we have a good number so far. So 8% said that would be me, 10% that would be half of me, and 2 to 4 is 31%, and 5+ is 29%.
Well, that's, again, similarly, 1-ish to 2, that's thirds pretty much. That's great. All right, so let's move on to our next slide, because I want to talk a little bit about what this session is and what this session is not, because I had to go back and remember what I wrote. I said I would do, always important. And this session is not going to be Evaluation 101. It's not going to be me talking at you. It really is going to be, I'm going to walk you through a brainstorming process. And, there'll be some reminders and some things to keep in mind, so there will be some learning going on, but I really want you to use your worksheet, or graphic organizer sounds fancier. Use your graphic organizer and take time right now, have about, 45 minutes, where you can do some planning for the year ahead, and then at the end we'll do a little bit of kind of goal setting. And this is a lot because we all, again, have the best intentions, but we know that the supplies need to be readied for the program that's tomorrow, and things kind of take over. So I want to walk through real quick. So again, if you wanted Evaluation 101, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be giving that to you, but I will have resources at the end to kind of help you find some of that information to get that those basics down, if that's something that you're looking for. So you will have access to that. But what we're going to be doing right now, let me move to my next slide. So we are going to first, everyone's going to kind of identify a program or something that they want to focus on for their brainstorming session. And then we're going to walk through a 4-step brainstorming process and spend about 8 minutes on each step, where I'll present a little bit of discussion of things you should consider as you think about this step. And then we're going to have 4 minutes of crickets, where you are actually going to go and look at think about the question and do some actual writing down of ideas, developing questions, thinking about data that you would want to collect, thinking about what tools you'll want to use, and then ultimately how you are going to apply or use that information. And spread throughout, I'm going to have a few reality checks, and there will be some prompts that I want you to respond to, and I called it a comments box. I had forgotten, but it's really the chat box. So at certain points, I think there's 4 of them, I will throw out some questions, and if you can type your answer into the chat box, I will actually try for my own purposes to copy the question into the chat box so we know what question people are answering. And at the end, Heather has told me we can download that information, and I'm going to kind of look at it and share some thoughts back. So it's kind of a mini evaluation going on throughout this process, to be open with you about how I'm going to ask that Heather remove any name information. So I'm just going to have the pure data. So you don't have to worry that I'm going to go back to your boss and say, oh, your employee thinks that you're not a risk taker. So don't worry at all about whether or not it will be used internally and your name will not be associated with the information. And then at the end, we'll do some goal setting, we'll have some questions, and then we will move on. So I am going to, and of course, as we do the steps and I send you off to do some brainstorming, I'll give you timings and also a 30-second warning when I want you to wrap it up. All right. So before we jump into our activity, I want to give proper credit where credit is due. So a lot of the thinking that I have used in forming this particular process, this exercise, was inspired by the March 2015 issue of the Journal of Museum Education, which was edited by Joy Kubarik and Maureen Trainer. And I do recommend, if hopefully you're a MER member and you get the journal, keeping this issue and referring back to it. In particular, I worked with the first three, well, it's really the second, third, and fourth article in the issue, which talk about kind of setting up and planning for evaluation. It's a really great issue of the journal. It's fully devoted to evaluation. So while we're talking about the where to start, the issue goes on to talk about how to share the information that you collect through your evaluation, and then how you can grow, how you can kind of start in one place and grow the work that you do as an organization, as a department, as an individual. So I did want to give these guys some credit, and if you want access to this journal, because you don't, you can join Museum Education Roundtable. I've included the URL there, and all members have access to the full archive of the journal, including this issue. So I do recommend it. It's very concise, focused, short articles that kind of really jumpstart your thinking around evaluation. And so that was part of my inspiration moving forward. So first step, everyone, I'm going to have you find your focus. So we're going to talk about and think about what it is you want to focus on for this evaluation brainstorm. What do you want to know more about? What do you want to evaluate? And then, so that could be a program. It could be people. Do you want to think a little bit more about how your volunteers are evaluated, and kind of how you can support their work and make sure that not only are they representing their institution, but they are feeling supported as workers and as educators. You might want to focus on an exhibit. And if you don't have a particular program or project that's specific to your museum work, you may also want to think about your own personal practice. And you can use this time to think about how to structure reflection and evaluation of your own personal practice throughout the coming year, which is very important. And then ultimately you want to also identify your audience, because when you identify the audience who will use or who will be given the results of your evaluation, you're really giving this process a purpose. And that's really important, and it's very helpful to have a purpose when we get to our next step, which is figuring out your question. So I'm going to give 3 minutes right now for everyone to fill out kind of those 2 top areas of your graphic organizer, to kind of defining the project you want to focus on, and then thinking a little bit about the audience, who is ultimately going to be the end user of that data. So we're going to start, and I'll let you know when you've got about 30 seconds left. All right, we have about 30 seconds for you to kind of wrap up your thinking. I do hope that as you do think about this, funders seem to be a pretty obvious audience for this type of evaluation. They're asking for it more and more. But internal audiences are great too, whether that's your institution or just your group itself within your department, even if it's a department of one. Okay, so that was thoroughly frightening to me and scary to have you just sitting out there in the world. I hope you got something accomplished during that 3 minutes. Next, we're going to move on to question development. Now, so the key step in this process, it really is answering that question of what do you want to know or learn about this particular project or whatever it is that you are hoping to learn more about. And something to keep in mind as you do this is to know that you may have a big program and it may be daunting to you to think of doing an evaluation of an entire program or entire suite of programs, and you can always focus on part of a whole. You don't have to tackle the whole thing at once, particularly if this is something that you are new to. If you take just an aspect of a program, one hands-on activity within a school program, and seeing how that works, it's a good way to get your feet wet and try some ideas out without necessarily tackling something big and overwhelming. So there are overarching questions and then sub-questions where you're going to get more specific that you need to identify. And evaluation questions can be descriptive. They can describe an experience. So examples of an overarching descriptive question would be kind of who participates in our program, what activities in our program are most successful, or how did participants use the materials that we created. So it's pretty straightforward. It's kind of one question and there's one answer in many ways. Overarching questions can be in many ways generic, but once you start getting into your sub-questions, that's where you're really going to think about the specifics as they relate to the program that you are evaluating. So comparative questions, and I do these a lot when I do evaluations, is kind of the idea of like, we say we're going to do this. These are our intended goals, but what is really happening when we run this program? And then ultimately there's kind of cause and effect questions where you're saying, does participating in our program, what are the results? What are the outcomes? Do they learn more? Do they walk away more engaged in climate change issues or wanting to know more? So, and descriptive, these kind of move in order from easiest to hardest or to more complex in terms of the kinds of questions that you can ask. Answering descriptive questions is much easier to do through an evaluation process than it is to kind of get into cause and effect. You're going to have a much more robust evaluation process protocol that you're going to have to put in place in order to answer those kinds of questions. So as you are coming up with your questions and developing your questions, you're going to want to keep that in mind. Kind of realistically, what are you able to take on? So I am going to give you now about 4 minutes to start generating some questions. And again, this is a brainstorm of an evaluation. You're not going to be able to walk away and just tomorrow start evaluating. The idea is this is going to start the juices flowing, get you to put things down on paper, and then at the end we're going to talk a little bit about next steps. How can you take this brainstorm and refine it into an actual evaluation process? So I'm going to give you your 4 minutes, and I will be quiet and uncomfortable until the 4 minutes are up, and I'll give you a 30-second warning. So go.
Elisabeth, are you still muted?
Oh my God, I'm totally still muted. Hi guys, sorry.
I'm like going, she's very quiet, but everybody's answering questions, so.
Yes. So yeah, I put that question out there. I'm glad everybody responded to my prompt.
Yep.
And Chet did the reality check. So you guys didn't get to hear my great talk about you needing to assess and think about what kind of evaluation you're already doing, if you're using that data, and hopefully thinking about whether some of that data could be used to answer questions. Like we have a lot of people who get data at the door that could potentially be used with our education departments and understanding how visitors are using our programs and resources. And is it time to maybe revisit or retire tools? And thank you for answering my prompt. And now I am going to move on to the evidence step. So what evidence do you need to collect to answer your questions? So again, nobody heard me say this, but this is not how are you going to collect your data. This isn't about tools. This is about thinking like, what data do I need to help me answer my questions? And the more focused your questions are, kind of the more obvious this is. And so, when I think of an example, I think about a learning goal for a school program. So I'm working with a museum right now, who I see, the MIT Museum is on this call right now. So if your goal is that students are going to learn about the engineering design cycle by building a prototype boat, what evidence that uses that process, what evidence do I need to collect that demonstrates that kids have done this, right? So I'm thinking that I need to collect their boats. And, we have a worksheet, and the worksheet walks them through the process and has them think about the different steps in the process. Are they putting answers on their sheets? In some ways, if you don't finish making your boat, you're not getting all the way through the process, so you haven't actually experienced the whole process. So is there a way we can make sure we tighten up the program so it's a little faster? And so everybody does get to the end, because getting to the end is getting to the end of the process that they're supposed to learn. So, thinking about what evidence there is to show me, to help me answer my questions. So I'm going to give you like 3 minutes, because I gave you way too long on the other one because I forgot to go off mute. So I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to think about what kind of evidence you need to collect to answer your questions. And again, as you go through, please feel free to revise your questions based on kind of working through the process. Okay, we got about 30 seconds. We'll move on to our next step. Okay, so our next reality check is resources, and this is where we need to balance our ambition with being practical. And again, thinking back to, being not necessarily needing to be holistic, but perhaps taking off a smaller chunk so that you can get your feet wet and test your ideas. And you haven't done a lot of evaluation, you might want to think about, well, if I do something small, then I can figure out how much time it really takes. So if I try something little and I see the reality of what that time takes, then I can plan for bigger projects further on. So, and then you might also just realize that you have an important project that you're working on and you really do want to do something big. And, we all need to advocate for our time, and sometimes you need to say, I need money for someone from the outside to come in, or we're going to have to write it into the grant that we want an outside evaluator to come. Because evaluation really it's more than just collecting data. You need to do something with the data, and sometimes it's easy at the front end to develop a survey and put it out there, but if you're not planning through the whole process to how you're going to use and apply what you learn through the collection of the data, you're not really evaluating. You're just collecting data. So we want to do better than that. So let's see if this works. I'm going to have another prompt. So how open are you or your staff to taking risks and trying new ideas when it comes to doing evaluations, engaging visitors, talking to them, asking them questions, giving them surveys? And is there a disparity perhaps between what you as an educator, who we tend to be kind of out there and pretty cool talking with people, is the leadership at your institution necessarily always on board? Are they as comfortable with going out there and asking questions? So we're going to move on to our next step, which are tools. So you've got some questions. You have an idea of how you might want to, what you need in order to answer those questions, what kind of data. Now the question is, how do you collect that data? And that's through creation of evaluation tools. Now this list here, I kind of organized it by kind of direct engagement with visitors, which are your surveys, which are definitely the most commonly used ones, particularly with educators. We often send that survey out to the teacher after they've come for the program, and also focus groups and interviews. And then we have kind of less engaged where we are doing observations. We are kind of eavesdropping on our visitors, documenting conversations. It's a little more passive. And then there's kind of data that museums often already are collecting, whether that's web analytics, participant data, knowing the zip codes of whoever has come to your program. Sometimes you ask for data when people register for a program. It's kind of stuff you're already collecting. Artifact review, which I actually find very useful, is just kind of taking the stuff that kind of the detritus, all this stuff that gets created through your programs, and kind of looking at it and thinking about what you can learn about your program by looking at those materials. So in that example about the school program where the kids are building boats, we had all kinds of worksheets that the kids were filling out, so we were collecting those, and then we can kind of look back and see what we can learn through what the kids did or didn't do with those materials they were creating. And then we have comment boards, in-gallery prompts, hands-on activities that visitors are doing in our galleries. And, it's a way to engage them it's not a conversation that we are having directly. It's an opportunity for our visitors to give us information and respond to our museums. And then there's journaling, which I think when we think a little bit about reflective practice might be something that we're doing as well. So when you're thinking about you answering how you're going to collect data, it may be more than one tool that you're using. You may want to do observations, but you also want to do a focus group as well and look at some kind of demographic data. So you might have a combination of a suite of tools that you're putting together to answer your question. Again, the simpler the question is that you want to answer, hopefully, the easier the tool is to create and implement, and you may want to take something small on to begin with. But I also would encourage you to be playful and creative. I often at the end of a program will just have people draw a smiley face, or not a smiley face, a little face, expressive face about kind of how are you feeling after this program. So it doesn't have to be always kind of super data driven and you can do analytics and crunch numbers. Sometimes you just want to get kind of a feel of a room. And so definitely keep those kind of opportunities in mind as well. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to think a little bit about tools, and then we will come back for our last reality check. Okay.
Elisabeth?
Did it again. Hi.
Yeah, you did.
So we're done. So again, I'm going to share with you some resources at the end. Hopefully Heather will post that stuff on with the webinar, where you can hopefully find some more information about developing questions, doing observations. There's a lot of great resources that museums are sharing out there to help you kind of focusing in a little more on those tools and really refining those tools to develop. So here's our reality check, ethics. Sometimes we barely get to the evaluation part, let alone thinking about the ethics behind asking and gathering information from our visitors. And so there's a really great article in that JME issue. I'm actually going to be sharing that article with you all so that you can read it. And we, Museum Education Roundtable does a reader guide for an article out of every issue, and we did one for that particular article. So you'll have some questions to help you think a little bit more about ethics. But, one of the things the author talks about is, you need to let the participants know the purpose of your evaluation, the time and effort required of them, any risks, and then how the information is going to be used. And I hadn't really thought of that very deeply when I first started doing surveys and the like, and I've become much more purposeful about kind of sharing that information ahead of time with visitors. There's also the idea that you need to respect participants' time, their expectations, and their privacy. And with expectations, the idea is like I come to a museum expecting to have a certain type of experience, and it doesn't necessarily involve taking a 20-page survey. That's not necessarily how I want to spend my time. So when you're developing your tools, you want to align your tools and what you're asking your visitor to do with their expectations of what they do at a museum. So when you think about wanting to get their feedback, think about creating a hands-on experience. That's what many people expect to do when they go. They want to learn something new. They want to touch something. So is there a way to create evaluation tools that really kind of mirror the museum experience? And you might even want to consider, and he gets more into this, developing a museum code of ethics. So that's like a whole other level of stuff. So now let's have you answer. I'm going to throw another prompt out there before we move on to our next step. If you want to throw your thoughts out there, you can add them in the comment box or the chat box. Last step in our process, how are you going to use the data after it is collected? And now he talks about this in the ethics article. You shouldn't collect data unless you plan to use it in some way. It's actually unethical to collect data from people. And so we oftentimes, particularly when we do surveys, will ask for demographic data. Are you going to do anything with the demographic data? Is it important or relevant in any way to how you want to, the question that you want to answer? So you really want to think. You don't want to go back to default like, oh, well, I should ask these questions. The question should be, am I going to use, what data am I going to use? And if you're not going to use the data that you collect, you shouldn't be collecting it. So, and again, you want to, as I mentioned earlier, you want to plan time for analysis into your process and have uses for your information in mind, whether that's, a report or I'm going to revise my program. But you also want to walk in knowing that you shouldn't know the answer to the question before, and you shouldn't suppose the answer to the question before you start your process. So although you may have ideas or inklings of how you might use your information and you should plan for it, expect that it might change based on the feedback that you're actually getting. And I also really want to plug advocacy as a use for data, whether that's doing internal advocacy within your institution, and if you want to hire another educator, how can you collect data and information to support that need, or external advocacy, whether that's for funders or government officials and the like, or potential community partners. What stories can you tell using your data? So we're going to give you a few minutes to think about that. And then we will come back and kind of do some goal setting.
Elisabeth, Corinne did ask a question about when you say use data, can the use be simply to answer a question that you have, for example, how old are the people coming to this program on average?
Yeah, and I think that when you're talking about a descriptive type of question, yeah, in many ways it's just, but why do you want to know that information? Is that going to maybe have an effect on the types of programming that you want to offer? Were you hoping to have younger people come and you're finding older people come? So, think about what changes you might make based on having that information in hand. Because I'm guessing there's a reason that you want to know that information. All right, we got about 30 more seconds to think about how you're going to use your data. You know, one thing I think about sometimes is having a, sometimes we just collect and collect and collect information, and, even just setting, every 6 months I'm going to stop and look at what we have, just setting timing goals for yourself so that you're actually doing something with it. And something might come up and then you decide, oh, I want to do a deeper dive and understand why this phenomenon is occurring. But if you're not checking in on the data and scheduling that, sometimes you miss those things. All right, so now we'll walk through our process. So now you want to think, this is, again, we've been throwing ideas on paper, thinking through some of the steps that you would take in order to start a process of evaluating something. And now you want to kind of set 3 next steps. And I would say one of the next steps would be probably refining my questions and clearing it up and making it a little more focused now that you've kind of walked through the process, even walking through the process again and refining. Another thing that I was thinking is important is to, what was that? To kind of, I'm totally forgetting. Thinking again about resources and kind of realistically what can we do, and not feeling bad about scaling back, thinking about the scope of your project and being realistic about kind of what you can do. There's nothing wrong with that. So maybe part of your next steps is to go through and cut it back, make it easier, make it more focused, make it something I can do in the few hours a week or a month that I have to focus on this. And then I would love if you could take some time to think about bigger picture goals. This has been a very focused kind of process that we've walked through. What kind of big picture ideas do you have for yourself personally? Maybe your team, if you're lucky enough to have a team, or even your institution, thinking about, how can we build a culture of evaluation? How can we collaborate better around sharing the information that we do collect? How can we not keep reinventing the wheel? And, right now I want you to think big, and then ultimately these things all have to be broken down into manageable chunks because, we have to tackle them in the real world. So I do encourage you to think big, but recognize that this is a big undertaking. And now we have a little bit of time as you wrap that up to think about any questions that you might have. And this has been a pretty specific and pretty individual process that we've gone through. I am not a fan of hypotheticals, so I wanted you to be able to focus on something real to you. Always my struggle in graduate school was there's so much hypothetical work, and I just wanted to go out there and do it, be in the situation. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to throw them into the chat box. Meanwhile, I can, and I'm going to throw, I drew an arrow instead of putting the prompt in. I'm going to throw the prompt into the box where I would love if you could share one word. Looks like we have some people typing questions. Also, if you could share one word that describes how you feel after taking this 45 minutes, and one word that describes how you feel about the upcoming school year that's going to start. I'm seeing that Erin, yeah. So I would say for you, Erin has a question about how to reach people who you're not reaching. And I think that in many ways comes through community connections. So, if you have teachers within a particular school districts, sometimes reaching out to perhaps the curriculum coordinator for the particular subject area that you work, and talking with them and helping them to maybe connect you with some teachers who aren't coming, or, they might have a kind of bigger picture sense, or, talking with the leaders of groups in communities who you're hoping to reach who aren't coming, and seeing if they have any insight. So sometimes you can't necessarily survey a community who's not coming, but you can reach out to leaders or to members of that community who, who might be able to help you answer that question. And, again, there's always that struggle, particularly with underserved audiences, where we don't want to burden them with, them educating us on their needs. So I think, you always want to be mindful and thoughtful about kind of how you connect with communities in meaningful ways before you just start asking. So, how do you ensure participation in program evaluation? That's a tough one. I think you have to set realistic goals, and in some ways kind of doing a pilot test before you really commit to something big, and getting a sense of kind of what tools people respond to. There's the labor involved, and that's tough, because if you're a small staff, is it really going to be you out there hounding people and harassing people not harassing, very nicely asking people to do things for you? You have to keep that in mind. And so, kind of giving yourself a chance to test things before you really commit wholesale is probably a good way to get a better sense of what people respond to in terms of, I know that I love when people ask me questions, and I'm more than happy to take a survey or to do a brief interview, but, you're going to have to get a sense from your audience about what they're game for. Lastly, I'm going to move real quick to additional. So Heather's going to post this up there, ideally. And I'll also put the graphic organizer up there, and I'm probably going to create a version that's a little less reliant upon the slides from the actual webinar. So you could, in theory, print something like this out and use it for yourself at other times. And again, I didn't organize it linearly in a linear fashion on the graphic organizer, because it's not really a linear process. Everything evolves together as you refine and focus. I will include a resource list that will have some websites. I forgot to mention one of the benefits of joining Museum Education Roundtable to get the Journal of Museum Education is also there's a reciprocal partnership with the Visitor Studies Association, where you have access to the Visitor Studies Journal through your Journal of Museum Education subscription. So you kind of get both, a lot of bang for your buck through that membership. There's a lot of great articles about evaluation specific to museum educators that you can access. I think there's actually a list of evaluation articles from the JME that I can pull for you that I'll include. I know that the latest issue of the JME is about gender issues in museums, and the reader guide they are currently working on focuses on evaluation and how to deal with gender within evaluation studies. So that'll be a really interesting piece, and it's a reader guide to guide you through. Also, any insights I got through the prompt responses, I see they kind of fell off as we went on. That's okay. And as I promised, we'll be giving you the Ethics in Museum Evaluation Reader Guide as well that you can use. So these things, I don't know if I'll have them all cleared up and ready to send to Heather for today when the webinar itself gets posted, but definitely within the next couple of days, those will be ready. And I think we may do an email follow-up to the group. I had an idea in my head that maybe at conference, which is coming up in a couple of months in Stanford, if a group, any of you want to come together, one of the things that the ethics article talks about is review of your surveys or your tools before you put them out in the world. And we don't have like a institutional review board, most of us, that we can run them past, but if we could be a peer group to kind of help each other and support each other in developing our tools, maybe we can schedule a kind of informal meetup where maybe as you work in the next couple of months on your tools, we can do a check-in to see how those are going. So please look for those. Maybe I'll have Heather email the group once all of those materials are up on the website. So happy evaluating. I'm your PAG co-chair. If you have any other questions that come up, please feel free to contact me. And, we've got conference coming up. So anything going on that you'd like to see at conference for education, let me know. And really, thank you for working through this strange experiment with me of having to talk to people who I cannot see and cannot talk back to me. So thank you.
Thank you, Elisabeth. That was great. I think it's also great just to have some downtime to actually formulate and think without other people distracting you in a lot of ways. So I think the downtime during the session was great, so people actually can sit down and think about things, because I think that's the biggest problem that we all have is we need to find the time to think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. So that was
Lynn Baum is on. Yep, she's the evaluator there. So.
Hi, Lynn.
And yes, I do want to thank Elisabeth, and I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And I hope you guys join us in September for the next one, and it will be on what are adult visitors learning on guided tours and how are they learning it. Kind of goes into play with this particular one. And as Elisabeth said, that we are having our annual conference in November 7th through 9th in Stamford, Connecticut. Museums on the Move. Registration is open. So if you guys just want to head over to the website to get more information about that, that'd be great. And Elisabeth's also giving a couple sessions and also our Education PAG lunch on that Thursday. So definitely stay tuned for that. And if Elisabeth does have some follow-up stuff, I will be emailing you guys later this week with that information then. I think that's it. We're after the 1 o'clock hour. So thank you guys all, and thanks again, Elisabeth, for giving this presentation today.
Thank you. I appreciated the opportunity.
No problem. We'll see you guys later then.